Ken Rosenthal leading the league in information. And Kenny, let's start here with a very interesting article that Jeff Passan wrote for YahooSports.com. We have a new regime here running Major League Baseball with Commissioner Rob Manfred, who seems to be very interested in taking on some of the initiatives to help speed up the game. And Jeff wrote about the idea of the strike zone potentially changing for the first time in a couple of decades.
He did. But first, Fran, I want to talk about this movie of which Harold speaks. 50 Shades of Sunny Gray? 50 Shades of Pete Gray? What are you talking about exactly?
You look like Mr. Gray, actually. I was looking at you.
All right, let's get to the strike zone before this gets any further damage here. All right, now, if you remember, guys, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a story saying that the MLB had presented a data packet to the union with a number of ideas for boosting offense. One of them was lowering the mound. One of them was actually bringing in the fences, wrapping the ball tighter, just items of discussion. Ending the shifts, outlawing the shifts was one possibility, and adjusting the strike zone was another. Now, as Fran said, Jeff Passan wrote last night that baseball is going to take a long look at the strike zone. The Playing Rules Committee will look at it this season with an eye on possibly changing it next season, 2016. What's interesting here is that there is data that shows since 2009, the strike zone actually has expanded. And there's been some good work done here by John Rogel of the Hardball Times and a Florida professor named Brian Mills. They've actually demonstrated that the strike zone has gotten larger, has gotten lower, and the actual square inches of the called strike zone has increased, according to Rogel, from 435 square inches to 475. And when you're talking about the diminishment of offense, this could be a major reason. The low strike generally is thought to be harder to hit than the high strike, or obviously the one at the belt. So this is something baseball is going to look at among a number of things. John Morosi, my colleague at Fox, wrote yesterday that they are progressing in their ideas about improving the pace of play, and there should be some rules in place, perhaps by spring training. And what is so interesting to me and refreshing, guys, is that the new commissioner, is clearly hitting the ground running here. He wants to do some things, wants to make some changes. They're being aggressive about it, and they're taking a long look at some different ideas that would improve offense. And, of course, the strike zone could have the most dramatic effect of all.
Tell you what, Ken, I love the fact they're looking into things to increase the offense. I'm not sold on raising the zone. I get it. I think you got to call more high strikes, and the tendency would be for hitters to swing at a lot of high pitches. One problem I have, guys take too many pitches. That's the problem. At the end of the day, this whole get deep in the count has ruined the game of baseball, the offense. The job is you take it to a pitcher, force him to get around the zone to get you in the count to hit. But the biggest thing I look at when you're talking about strike zone and bringing it up, I think there's got to be a lot more looking into what do left-handed hitters hit. A natural swing for a left-hander is a ball down low. Now all of a sudden you want to raise it up and get a left-hander hitting a high pitch, they're not going to hit the ball. Right-handers have a natural swing that hits high pitches, and left-handers don't. So I think it's great to go into all these things, but you have to go deeper than just maybe what strike zone, or what do we call that, Quest Tech, might be revealing to umpires. You got to take deeper into who's it affecting too. What do left-handers do against a low pitch?
Harold, I would expect that discussion would take place, and it's certainly a fair point that you're raising. And when you look at things like this, you have to look not only at what you're suggesting, at how it would impact the game right away, but also any unintended consequences that might result from a rule change. And often you can't anticipate those consequences. That's why they're unintended. So, again, the point is that baseball has identified the low strike as a problem. Now, whether they've looked at it to the extent you're talking about, I imagine that they have. And ultimately, well, okay, but ultimately they're going to have to decide whether to change it or not. And with Quest Tech, and Quest Tech is, of course, that computerized pitch tracking system that is used to judge umpires, you can have umpires adjust the zone. It may take some period of adjustment with them, but you can have a uniform strike zone called in a certain way because of Quest Tech if you want to change the zone one way or the other.
You know, I think it's interesting, too, that I think we're still trying to figure out the zone for the last, whenever Quest Tech came in, 12 years ago? They don't even want to call it Quest Tech anymore. It's had 2 different names for the zone. Now it's strike or whatever. But I think when that came in, you all of a sudden, you trained a group of umpires to try to call a universal strike zone when naturally you're going to see things the way you see it. So now we're saying, okay, now raise what we trained you for 10 years and see it differently again. It takes me back to 1988 and 87. I know we got video of this because we discussed it, and I was playing when all of a sudden they said, we're going to have a discernible stop, and they called a balk on a pitcher like every time they came to a stretch and set the zone. They called balks because they said you have to stop your hands moving, and everything was a balk. I mean, even hitters were swinging at balls going, what? You mean, what? A balk? Okay. So you go through growing pains. They eventually settled on what worked out. I think the same thing here. It's going to have to get flushed out. But at the end of the day, I know we got smart people trying to figure everything out. I'm just hoping we don't sit there and try to statistically say this is what's happening. You have to go back and look at the genesis of it all.
Oh, hold on. Statistically, you do have to look at what's happening.
Oh, I said, you will, but I hope they don't stick to just statistics and you actually go and look at and ask people, what are you teaching? Why are guys swinging a certain way?
Well, I'd like to see the stats on left-handed hitters against the low strike over the last 5 years.
And what I'd like to see...
I'd like to see that. But again, Harold, what is driving this are the numbers and the demonstration by these 2 guys that Jeff Passan named in his article that, hey, that strike zone is larger. It is quantifiably larger. This is a good thing that we're seeing this and we're able to adjust, at least in theory, the strike zone because of that.
And Kenny, just to make it clear with Quest Tech here, so when this came in, the idea was to try to get umpires to kind of call that strike right above the knee or right at the knee.
By the book, above the knee to the chest. So now you open that zone up.
So you open it up, but then now it's just dipped a little too low is the thinking. Is that correct?
In 1996, they adjusted the strike zone, and it was from the top of the knee, it had been there, to the bottom of the knee. That is what changed. And then once Quest Tech was introduced and the strike zone was called uniformly at that level, it crept downward. And what has resulted, Fran, you're right, is that it's crept further downward and to a point where it is affecting the game. People believe that it is definitely affecting the game. In fact, these 2 researchers that Jeff Passan named in his article, they thought it could be affecting offense by as much as 35 to 41%. Now, that sounds high to me, but again, they're researchers and I'm not. And it would be interesting to see exactly more data from baseball about what they see statistically about what is happening.
There's no doubt about it, but what I'm saying is it's not necessarily the zone as much as it is the player's approach. When you take the first pitch and you're 0-1 every at bat, you're not hitting in the big leagues. It's not going to happen. Trying to drive that pitcher out on a 100-pitch count has to be changed. If you all of a sudden get aggressive, we'll see those numbers change. And now they're not sitting back able to cherry-pick the low pitch.
And beyond that, Harold, C.J. Nitkowski, my colleague at Fox, he made a good point on Twitter today. He said good hitters adjust. And he showed a video of Mike Trout hitting a low fastball. And obviously that needs to be happening too. But there seems to be a consensus within the game that this is a problem. General managers talked about it at the GM meetings. It seems to have been talked about at the highest levels of baseball, according to Jeff Passan's report. So we have a problem. The question is how to fix it. The problem is that offense is too depressed. It's too diminished right now. There are a number of things baseball can look at to address this. They've talked about them, and they are now looking at them.
Well, my last point on this is, yes, good hitters adjust, but the great hitters are one that are hitting. So we've taken good and made it almost impossible. You have to be great to perform now. And it shouldn't be at that much of a difference where you're not able to succeed. We're asking the impossible.
A great point, too, is that, right away when you heard about this, you came up with the idea that it potentially could penalize left-handed hitters because of the swing, and right-handed hitters swing, or they're a little more right-handed dominant and swing more level across. I hope all these different ideas are incorporated.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, when the decisions are starting to come to maybe mess with the strike zone, because that's a great point, and you came up with it just like that maybe other people might not think about, because you're right. Left-handed hitters swing differently than a right-handed hitter. The debate's going to rage on. We'll, I'm sure, revisit it in the weeks and months to come. Kenny, let's quickly move on to Yoan Moncada. Had a workout with the Dodgers, and so is he getting closer to picking a team, or a team picking him?
Well, it has been reported that by the end of next week, his agent expects to be ready to go. Now, this workout with the Dodgers yesterday was in Clearwater, Florida. Private workout attended by a number of their top executives. I was told, but I have not been able to confirm exactly, that Andrew Friedman, Farhan Zaidi, and Josh Burns, the top 3 guys in the front office, all were there. Now, what are they trying to determine? What this guy is worth, what he's going to cost. One executive who's been kind of monitoring what's going on here believes that the price for Moncada, the contract, is going to be somewhere in the $40 to $50 million range. And remember, there's a 100% tax on the contract, meaning that the total outlay will be $80 million to $100 million. That's one estimate. We'll see what happens. You never know. Sometimes these things go lower. Sometimes they go right where they're estimated to go. But Moncada is clearly a guy drawing a lot of attention. And I'll say this as well. I just tweeted something about this. He's 19 years old. He's a Cuban player, and by the way Cuban players are signed to Major League Baseball, he can get this kind of money. It's perfectly within the rules. But there are kids in the draft, the domestic draft, that their potential earnings right out of the draft are capped. There's a system in place. So once this guy signs, I expect that there will be renewed talk about the inequity of the system, and maybe an international draft is the way to go. That is also something that Commissioner Manfred has discussed as something he wants to do. But right now, the system is out of kilter.
No, I brought that up last week, Ken, about Puerto Rico. I think the draft has killed Puerto Rico, compared to Venezuela, Dominican, or even here in this case with a kid coming from Cuba, because they have the right to be free agent. And that's what free agency is, and that's what free enterprise is. You can negotiate, but the way our system is, the draft says you're going here and this is what you're getting paid, and it's not fair to the other kids right now.
I would agree with that, Harold. And again, this is something that Commissioner Manfred has pledged to look at. An international draft is really complicated. That is why it hasn't been implemented yet. And the reason it's complicated, every country and every baseball federation in each country has a different set of rules, a different agreement with MLB right now. There are different agreements between Japan, between Cuba, Venezuela, name the country. So it is not easy to implement, but they're going to have to try, as they've tried in the past, to get this done.
Yeah, but if you put I was just going to say real quick, if you put a cap on an international player, say it's $10 million, this is what you're getting to Mr. Moncada. You think he's going to say, nope, I'm going back to Cuba? He gets a $10 million cap. Why does he get 30, 40, 50 million? Well, Tanaka comes over and gets what he gets. It's $10 million.
Actually, Aaron, I'm a free enterprise guy. I'm in favor of no cap. No cap domestically, no cap internationally. Just let's go. That's not the way it's going to go down. And obviously, they've put these restrictions in place with the consent of the Players Association. It was collectively bargained. But the system is clearly not working exactly as it should.
All right, quickly, Kenny, give us a comp on Moncada, and how soon will we see him in the majors?
Don't know how soon we'll see him, Fran. I would expect he'll do some time in the minors. That's the overall industry expectation. We've heard Cano, we've heard Robbie Alomar. Obviously, those are potential Hall of Fame players. One is a Hall of Fame player, but he clearly is a player with big tools, a lot of talent, and he's drawing this kind of attention because he is that good.